Welcome back to the Awesome series. This is the TheKloudWiz. Today, we are going to talk about the AWS shared responsibility module. Now, responsibility, as far as using cloud infrastructure is concerned, is shared among AWS and their customer. AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud, whilst the customer is responsible for security in the cloud. This means as AWS, they are responsible for the physical infrastructure. So talk of the data centers, the servers, and the hardware equipment. Customers, on the other hand, are responsible for what they put into the cloud. So talk of their applications and their data. However, these responsibilities changes depending on the type of service that the customer uses, whether it's a managed service or a self-managed service. So let's look at the AWS responsibility. AWS is responsible for the foundational services, that is compute, storage, databases, and networking. The global infrastructure, that is a physical data center, including the regions, the availability zones, and edge locations, are AWS responsibility. AWS will be responsible for the physical security of these data centers, decommissioning storage devices when they are broken, the host operating systems, the hardware, the software, the networking, and the virtualization infrastructure. Now, let's look at the customer's responsibility. So things that fall under customer's responsibility is their data, applications, identity and access management, guest operating systems, virtual networks, firewall configurations, encryption, integrity, authentication, and identity. This includes client-side data, server-side data, and network traffic. The customer then is now responsible for security of the applications running in the cloud. That is setting up passwords, setting up role-based access, patching and maintaining of the guest operating system. So for example, if you are using a compute resource, the operating system that is installed on these compute resources are your responsibility as a customer to patch and then maintain them. Setting up security groups or firewall configurations, including setting up intrusion detection or prevention systems, your virtual network configurations, account management, including login, user authentication, and authorization. Now, let's look at the shared responsibility model by service type. If the customer is using an infrastructure as a service, so service like the Amazon Elastic Block Store, Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, that is EC2, and then the Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, that is the VPC, then you as a customer has more flexibility in configuring the network and storage. You can configure your access controls, manage more aspects of security, and you as a customer will handle the operating system, the applications, and then identity and access management configurations. AWS responsibility is on the platform as a service and the software as a service types. Services like the Lambda, which is a managed compute service, RDS, which is a managed database service, and Elastic Beanstalk, which is a platform as a service. With these services, you as a customer don't need to manage the underlying infrastructure. AWS is going to handle the operating system, database patching, firewall configurations, backup, and disaster recovery. So you as a customer can now focus on managing your code or data. However, there are some shared responsibilities regardless of the service type. Both AWS and the customer are responsible for patch management. For example, a service like the EC2 service, the customer will patch the guest operating system, whilst a service like RDS, which is a managed service, AWS takes responsibility of the patching. Another one is configuration management. So AWS takes care of configuring the physical infrastructure, whilst you, the customer, also configures your system in the AWS cloud. And whilst AWS train their own staff on the best practices and how to manage the data centers, you as a customer also need to train your staff on how to use AWS services. Now, the analogy here is this. When you rent a house, the landlord here, AWS, is in charge of the building, electricity, and then security of the house. You as a tenant, you are responsible for furnishing, locking your door. So you're also responsible for your own security and then also making sure that you don't start fire that would cause a disaster in the house. So that is all about it, about the AWS shared responsibility model. If you learned something new today, kindly subscribe, like, share, and turn on notifications. The name is TheKloudWiz, and I'll see you in the next video.